Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Wholesale Change, the webcast and podcast from Distribution Strategy Group, where we provide thought leadership for wholesale change agents like you, because if you're on this call, you probably are a wholesale change agent. My name is Ian Heller. I'll be your co-host today, along with my business partner, the man who will never let you down, the groovy guru of great strategy, the doctor of distribution, my business partner, Jonathan Bine, PhD. How you doing, buddy?
Good, but I want to level set Ian. You say the nicest things full of hyperbole about me every week. And I just want to level set. I think everybody knows you're the smartest guy in most rooms. So I feel very fortunate to be working with you.
Well, I would agree that right this moment, I'm the smartest guy in this room because I'm all by myself. So anyway, hey, are you sharing your screen? I can't really tell from what I'm looking at.
No, I can share, or if you can share, however you want to do it.
Oh, okay. Well, share and share alike, right? So let's see. So I will broadcast and let's see. Can you all see that? Okay.
I can, yes.
Awesome. Okay, good. So, but before we get started, I wanted to tell you about something I learned just this morning, and maybe I should have known before, I'm not sure. But DG McPherson was speaking at a conference this morning, and he talked about their mobile app, and he said that they have item recognition built into it, which I didn't know any distributor had that. Did you?
No.
Yes.
Well, I mean, the question is who is the technology provider? Is this something Grainger built internally, or is there a third party behind the scenes, right?
I don't know. I scrambled around trying to find some more information, but I couldn't find it. But it's built into their app, and I haven't had a chance to try it out, but I did reload the app to get that functionality. So we'll give it a try and see how it works, and we'll get back to everyone and tell them what we've learned. So I thought that was good, though, right? I mean, they've always been a very techie distributor ever since the 90s. And so it's good to see them taking the lead and building that functionality in because, customers clearly are going to want it. And we just finished some research for the National Association of Wholesaler Distributors, and it showed that distributor customers are much more optimistic, or they're going to adopt a lot earlier item recognition than voice ordering, right?
Right. Yep.
Okay, I see Dean has joined us today. Dean, are you gonna weigh in? Can we hear the dulcet tones of Dean Mueller's voice? No, that's all right. He's probably in the car. He probably doesn't know he dialed in. Okay. Well, Dean, jump in when you want to, buddy. We're glad to have you here. So one of the things we wanted to talk about today was, really why you have to be a high tech and a high touch distributor. But there's a reason that distributors are not high tech, right? I mean, it's really hard. And I don't think people understand the complexity of B2B versus retail. And so we decided to put together a list of what is different about a B2B site than a B2C site, because you have to provide for these things in your requirements and in your design, or else you will have a distributor e-commerce site that is doomed and absolutely won't work. So what we want to do is walk you through a couple of these pages, really. And so if you're on the podcast, don't worry, we'll read off the items. And then we want to talk about what you can do about this overwhelming complexity, because it's a lot of times when you talk to distributor executives or managers, they'll sort of whisper to you, well, the reason we aren't successful is because the CEO is a dinosaur who doesn't get the need for e-commerce, right? I mean, you've heard that a lot, right, Jonathan?
Yeah, there's a lot of call outs to T-Rex and his or her brethren.
Yeah, right. And the reality is that a lot of times those people have, from their perspective, spent millions of dollars on e-commerce. I mean, you talk to CEOs and CFOs, and they'll say, that's completely unfair. We spent a fortune on e-commerce. We've gotten zero return. There's no adoption. Nobody's using the site. And yet we're supposed to continue to throw millions and millions of dollars into this project that never seems to produce any results. And so you have this dynamic where some people in the company, in the distribution company, think, wow, the CEO's a dinosaur, the CFO doesn't get it. They're just trying to make this quarter's earnings. They're not willing to spend on e-commerce. And the CFO and CEO are saying, what are you talking about? We spent millions on this thing and it's not produced anything. Persuade me to spend more, and other people can't do that. And one of the reasons it's so hard is because distributors have such complex requirements compared to retailers, who is always who we get compared to, which isn't really fair. So go ahead.
Yeah, but the other problem, Ian, as we've talked about, is a problem of attribution, right? Which is, the e-commerce site, people are going there to get information about products and prices and all kinds of things. And then they may not be buying from the e-commerce site, but in fact, the e-commerce site is playing a major role in driving the transaction in the first place. It may come in through a branch, through a CSR, through EDI, through email, or through the shopping cart. But to the extent that it doesn't come in through the shopping cart, e-commerce isn't given credit for the great work that it's doing. And this is a huge problem for many, many, many distributors, is not being able to attribute the value that their site is providing to them.
Yeah, and I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that they don't have the functionality on the site or the data for the customer to process the order there, right? Like they may not have prices on all the items or have all the items online, or, you know, be able to charge an account in a way that's integrated with your ERP, you know, maybe cash orders only. I mean, there's all kinds of things that go wrong on B2B sites. And then the second one is sometimes people, especially in B2B, they have a more complex question. So they might put together all the information from the order online, but then they call their account manager or customer service person to say, hey, am I ordering the right stuff, for example?
Yep.
So just in terms of transaction complexity, I mean, if you look at retailers, they've got very simple one-time transactions, right? So this category is or this row is transaction complexity. And retailers have very simple transactions. You go online, you look for what you want, you put in your credit card. It's really always a credit card. And then you place the order, right? Now, distributors, a lot of different options, right, Jonathan?
Way more options, yeah.
Want to give us a few?
Well, I think as we look at what happens in the B2B world, there's many ways that people can purchase beyond credit card. The actual payment function, it could be an account, it could be with a credit card, it could be with a check.
Yeah,
with a check, right.
That's just the payment. I mean, you could also.
This is the payment.
Yeah, you may not even be placing orders on the website. You might be placing it through an e-procurement system or through a marketplace, or and then that transaction itself may be very complex. Like you may have a blanket PO with a bunch of scheduled releases. You may have auto replenishment. You may have to meet JIT, just in time or Kanban requirements. A lot of times you need workflow for orders. I mean, look at how many people are on one business account many times. We'll get to that in a minute, but you have one buyer per account, per phone number, per email in retail. In distribution, you've got, several dozens, hundreds of users on one account, and you have to provide workflow connections to all of them. And you may have different purchasing threshold authorities for every individual person. It's a vastly more complex purchase. And in distribution, your website is never entirely self-standing. It always has to be connected to the ERP. In retail, you don't really have to do that. You can just process orders on the website because it's a credit card order.
Yeah, I think the closest analog to more than one person involved in the retail transaction is, honey, do we have room on our credit card to make this purchase? That's the closest it comes to having more than one person involved in the transaction, is asking the person who controls the purse strings, whoever that may be in the family.
Well, I've never gotten that question, so I guess we know who controls the purse strings in my family. So Phil, a good friend of the show, has posed a question in a statement. The question is, aren't there a limited number of tech gurus that land in the industrial space? There's a twofold problem he identifies. One is that techies don't see the opportunity in distribution. And the second is that distributors are unwilling to pay for talent that may or may not show a return. I think this is a real issue. I think Phil's hit on the head here. There just aren't that many experts, and you have to have experts do this, because again and again, I've seen people try to establish requirements or document requirements for a distributor's website build, but they come out of retail or out of manufacturing, or they built brochure sites, or they built sites for lawyers or whatever. It has nothing to do with this complex stuff that we see in distribution. And Phil's exactly right. There's a very limited number of tech gurus that work in the space. I mean, I'd probably have to think about it to name one.
Well, we don't think of R&D for tech, for IT, as something that most distributors do. I mean, right. It is reserved for the absolute largest, right, that are doing any kind of innovation with technology.
Yeah. And Phil's right. Distributors are unwilling to pay for the talent that may or may not show a return. And that is a rational decision in the short term and a deadly one in the long term, which we'll get to in a few minutes. But Phil, thanks so much for your question and your point. That's exactly right. We love hearing from attendees, so please feel free to weigh in. Okay, secondly, in retail, this is the new row here for you podcast listeners. Many purchases are non-essential and mistakes cause little impact. I mean, a lot of retail buying is recreational. You know, I'm going to look for some new fashion, especially me because I'm such a fashion plate. Or I'm going to look for sporting goods. Or I'm going to look for whatever. And then some stuff is more essential, like household goods, but almost none of it is going to bring your household to a grind to a halt if you don't get it right. If the supplier, if the retailer ships you the wrong thing, it's not like your household stops functioning. That is not true in B2B. In B2B, a lot of purchases are very important to ongoing operations. Mistakes can make a major impact. You ship the wrong thing, it doesn't work, production comes to a halt. The customer is inconvenienced, it costs them real money. The stakes are just so much higher.
Yeah, you can put a cost on mistakes by segment, by distributor, that can range into the thousands of dollars per hour, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Every hour that the mistake goes on, you're incurring some additional costs in the business, and that cost could be significant for example, you gave the production line, right?
Yes, and here's the thing. That is a bad thing for distributors if they screw it up, but it's also an opportunity to earn margin by being known as reliable. And so if you were to build a great website that customers trusted and they knew when they placed an order on there, they were going to get the same great service as if they picked up the phone, you're going to be all over those orders. You're going to pick it right, ship it right, deliver it right, and on time, then you can get more margin.
Right.
But being more reliable because the stakes are higher.
Well, and we see this reflected in the pricing of distributors who are selling into these high stakes environments.
Right.
We had a private equity backed client that was selling into the pipeline, the oil pipeline space. And they had two parts of their business. One was low margin, which was not selling into the pipeline, but these guys were selling into the pipeline and they were able to charge a premium for the products they had because of the value of what the end customer was doing.
Yeah, we've seen it over and over again. I think another thing that is different is that the requirements are very similar across retailers, right? I mean, you've got a product catalog, you've got a single pricing file in most cases that applies to everybody. And then you need to collect your images. And so the e-commerce requirements for a Target probably aren't very much different from the e-commerce requirements for a local retailer, right? And maybe a lot bigger in terms of Target. You may have to account for geography, but by and large, the transactional stuff is the same regardless of the size, location, category of the retailer. That's not at all true in distribution. I mean, you might be the world's leading e-commerce expert for MRO distributors, and you're pretty much gonna have to start over when it gets to building products and construction materials, because you're gonna suddenly run into things you've never run into before, like blueprint takeoffs and specified products and reserved inventories and a bunch of stuff that doesn't exist if you've been running e-commerce at a relatively buy and sell focused MRO distributor.
Yeah, the platform doesn't extend for free to new categories. If you look at Amazon's great success, they started with books, they built the platform, right? And then they started doing CDs and then DVDs. Did we have DVDs back then? I guess we did. But once they got the platform built, they could just expand the number of product categories. And to your point, even though there's this huge volume of transactions they're doing, they are very simple transactions.
Yes.
On the consumer side. Right.
Right. Not in B2B. And leading to that or related to that is that in distribution, your customers often need some kind of consultative selling and technical support. They've got questions. It's not like the simple stuff that's sold in retail where it's very easy to answer most customer questions with some basic product data. In B2B, customers are often buying systems of things, right? So, I'm setting up a new air compressor. I want to know which, hoses and pressure valves, et cetera, that I need to make this system work. It's not like buying a shirt online and trying to make sure you get the size right. It's very consultative in nature in many cases, and customers have technical questions. So the bar that has been set to have great technical information sufficient to answer most customers' questions in B2B for distributors is much higher than in retail. And this is again related to the risks, right? If you get it wrong in retail, it's like, no big whoop, I'll send it back. In distribution, it's like, well, a lot of times I'm just going to call because I can talk to somebody, get some reassurance about what I'm buying, because I can't find the answer in the technical data on the website. So distributors need much, much better technical information and product data, and they are really often building it worse than the retailers do. So switching costs, a customer can switch retailers at really no cost. That's not true between distributors and their customers, which is a good thing for distributors. You want to add more of that, frankly. You want to make it more expensive for your customers to switch. But you can pretty much go from site to site to site in retail, and you're authorized to buy from anywhere because it's your credit card. In B2B, there are often restrictions about where you can buy, and it's necessary to buy from someone who you have an open line of credit with in many cases, and who understands your delivery requirements, and who has people that can understand your sophisticated questions. And so you can't just go from site to site. And that's frustrating for customers because they don't have a lot of choices for suppliers sometimes. But I think it gives you all kinds of places to differentiate as a distributor.
Yeah, I mean, both the retail and the B2B, the distributor side have the following thing that on the retail side, you may have accumulated some level of loyalty purchases, right? And on the B2B side, you may have accumulated some volume that gives you better pricing. Those are sort of similar types of benefits, different mechanism. But if the distributor's done it right, the switching costs go far beyond the volume discounts that somebody's getting in terms of how they've created lock-in by tying into the customer's value chain. And we talked about this in the last couple of sessions. If you're doing things with VMI, that's one level of lock-in. Or if you're doing things that improve their procurement, that's one level of lock-in.
Sure.
But if you're actually involved in the core operation, that's where the switching cost gets really high.
Right. Okay, I'm going to jump ahead to the next page rather than go through every single bullet point here. Okay, so pricing in retail. In retail, just about everyone's going to get the same price in almost every case, right? For the most part, people are not negotiating with Home Depot. Maybe in the B2B divisions they have, but in retail, you're just paying what they charge. Pricing is entirely standardized across almost every SKU, for almost every retailer. Think about how complex this is in distribution. Jonathan, you've worked with pricing. Describe the complexity that you've seen in your experience.
It's literally an order of magnitude more complex. Right. In terms of managing the different contract pricing, the different segments. How do you create fences between one segment and another? That's really what you want to do in the B2B world, so that you can capture value. The only thing you see in difference for pricing in customers in the retail world is based on volume, in part on geography. The price you pay for food at IHOP in Las Cruces, New Mexico is different than the price you pay for IHOP in New York City. But for the specific IHOP location, it's the same in New York City, or it's the same in Las Cruces, New Mexico.
Right.
So the level of effort involved in pricing for distributors is much higher, and it's reflected in the number of people that they have to deal with special pricing. We're working with one of the really large electronic product distributors, and they have well over 100 people available to handle special pricing requests and special quotation requests. So that's one measure of the complexity.
Yeah, and by virtue of the fact that they have those people, it hurts their ability to sell online, because when you engage those people, you're probably not putting the order through the website.
Correct. Yes.
And I think, the reality is that distribution is a complex pricing environment. It's always going to be, but here's what we saw in the pandemic. A huge amount of volume that used to go to distributors went to retailers because retailers had the digital capabilities and distributors did not. There was huge shift in channel from B2B to retail, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
That means that customers who have been so demanding about pricing requirements, when the chips were really down and they just needed the material, they didn't care. They bought wherever they could get the material from. And, so that this doesn't mean that distributors can ignore their pricing. I think if anything, it means they need to be more rigorous about it, but it also means there's room for margin if you have great digital capabilities, and there's room to pick up share if you have great digital capabilities. And distributors lost because they weren't the ones with those great capabilities during the recession or during the pandemic. Now, another thing about retail is the vast majority of what you buy is shipped via small package carrier. I mean, think about how many UPS, FedEx, and Amazon trucks have been to your house since the last time a freight truck dropped off something. And, so you ordered a refrigerator or you ordered some big item that came by freight truck, you probably get 100 or 200 or 300 deliveries from small package carriers for every one of those freight truck deliveries that you get, because retail is a small package freight carrier business. And guess what? If you're a retailer, you can plug in, ShipStation or whatever and hook into these delivery companies and your delivery problems are solved. You don't have to worry about freight. And one of the effects of that is that the cost of shipping generally does not factor in to whether or not the customer makes the purchase. I mean, they might say, I don't want to spend $15 on shipping, so I'll look around to buy it somewhere else. But shipping has become commoditized. You've got this new vastly huge player in Amazon who's got 150,000 trucks through whatever that they're putting on the street to deliver packages. So you basically have these four small package carriers, USPS, FedEx, UPS, and Amazon, who are battling it out in the marketplace and driving down costs, or holding down costs anyway. Well, distributors have a whole bunch of stuff that has to be delivered by freight. That means, first of all, right up front, the cost of the delivery is a significant portion of the transaction. Whether the distributor is paying for it or the customer is paying for it, that's a huge cost. A truck delivery is a much larger cost in the transaction than a small package carrier cost is. So that means it's affecting purchase decisions, and it means distributors have many fewer ways of delivering heavy items, which is a big component of their sales, because the freight costs get exorbitant or, very, very high once you start talking about any real distance from the point of origination.
Yeah, on the retail side, I mean, there's some things where to your point, the overwhelming majority fits the description you've given, delivered via small package. When I buy a fridge from Home Depot, it would not occur to me to figure out how to take that fridge myself, versus have Home Depot deliver that for me, right? The likely costs in chiropractic and physical therapy bills for me delivering that fridge myself are far offset by the cost of whatever it is they're charging me to have that thing delivered. But overwhelmingly, it is, except for that fridge or appliance or something like that, it's small products that can be delivered common carrier.
Right. And that's a big advantage for retailers and distribute, also you can just get these software packages, like I said, that just automatically schedule for the shipment, gives the customer a real freight price in real time, and then, coordinates with those carriers to set up the shipping. I mean, you place the order, you immediately get a tracking number, right? I mean, try that with your average freight line. It just doesn't, those capabilities just aren't there for the most part, not for, short LTL deliveries. And so it's a more complex environment. That means you're selling bigger, heavier stuff. The freight costs are expensive. They're a bigger part of the transaction, and it makes distribution, e-commerce harder than retail. Now, bidding. When's the last time you got a bid from a retailer?
Well, probably the closest would be not retail, but is not an Angie's List type of thing, right?
Right. Sure. For a contractor.
For a contractor, right?
Right. But in B2B, we get bids all the time that we have to respond to, right? And it's not just bids. It's also blueprint takeoff, specified products, and quotes. In retail, we just don't see that stuff. The specified product is whatever you happen to pick after you've sorted through the options on Amazon or Target or whatever, or Home Depot. And In B2B, that makes it much more complicated because you have to have a process in place to go from someone's search and selection of products to a bid based on the quantity and the terms that they're expecting. And then you've got to send that back to that customer. And then, do you have a way for them to go ahead and execute the order on site? Do you submit the bid on site? I mean, my experience with most distributors is customers may put together their manifest, their product list on the website, but they submit the bid by calling their sales rep or their inside salesperson. They may send them an email, but they're not closing the loop online. And so this is another way that distributor websites look like they're not adding value because ultimately the order is placed offline, even though the customer may have put together the product list and specifications and whatever from their website. We also have a huge amount of conflict between sales channels in B2B, and this is not so much true in retail. Now, there's some channel conflict in retail because they have stores and they have websites, but that can be solved by the CEO giving a mandate. We're going to emphasize one or the other, or we're going to let you guys just continue to sell in competition with each other. In distribution, you have an enormous amount of conflict between channels in many cases.
Enormous and growing.
So go on about that.
Well, we've been talking a lot about the rise of marketplaces and as a way that people both shop and buy for products. And that is coming on like a tsunami in terms of the preferences of end customers, how they shop and buy. And we have manufacturers creating their own conflict by starting to go direct to the customer. And they're willing to live with that conflict because they're deciding to go direct to the end customer. So there's an acceleration of conflict at this point.
Yeah, so this isn't just between sales channels. You're talking about between distribution channels. So there's conflict within the distributor because the sales reps don't like the website or they don't want the website to show pricing or whatever. And then you've got conflict in the supply chain where manufacturers are selling direct. We've got growing data that manufacturers are increasingly selling direct to end users and they're selling to marketplaces. So, I mean, distributors talk about selling to marketplaces, but if your manufacturers view those marketplaces as other distributors, then they're always going to have a pricing advantage. I mean, if I'm running Acme Manufacturing and I sell through if I sell through Ian and Jonathan's wholesale company, right? And we say, Ian and Jonathan's wholesale company, we want to sell on Amazon Business. So we do. What happens when the Acme Manufacturing sells on Amazon Business themselves? From their perspective, Amazon Business is just another distributor.
Right.
And is there enough margin for that extra layer? I mean, now you've got a distributor in the channel, really? You're going to have manufacturer, distributor, marketplace, customer when the manufacturer is already selling to the marketplace?
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't seem sustainable to me. Does it to you?
Numbers don't work. Nope.
No. Okay. And we're about to wrap up with what's different. Then we'll jump into some recommendations. Next, digital ordering methods are limited to the website and mobile app and retail, right? So there's the only way you could really place an order in retail is you go to the website, electronic orders, you go to the website or you place an order through a mobile app. Look at all these methods, and you've been really researching these and expanding the list over the years, Jonathan. Run through these methods of ordering from a distributor.
Yeah, well, part of it is that in the retail and the consumer world, we don't make a distinction in our mind between where we shop and where we buy because they're usually the same place, right? You go to Amazon, you shop for something, you buy it. Now, you could shop on Amazon and then buy at Best Buy or do some kind of combination like that. And you hear people doing that. But for the most part, where you shop is where you buy. If you're talking to the Land's End customer service rep, that's where you're shopping and that's where you're buying. In the B2B world, we've looked at 10 to 12 different ways that people could shop, meaning research, evaluate, assess, separate from how they could buy some of the things you have listed here: website, mobile app, microsites, email to order, fax order, et cetera. So you literally have 100 plus possible combinations of how people shop and how they buy. In the old days, or in the recently old days, I could shop in a print catalog and go online to buy. So that is radically more complex in the B2B world. Now, in fact, of the 100 possible ways, combinations of ways that people could shop and buy, there's some well-worn grooves, right? If they shop digitally, they tend to buy digitally. Tend, not always. If they shop talking to a customer service rep or a sales rep, they might be inclined to buy in a branch or a store, or perhaps with the customer service rep or sales rep. But it's much more complex than in the B2C world.
Yeah, and you mentioned print catalogs. So the only print catalog I still get regularly is Uline.
Yeah.
I mean, I get an occasional catalog from somebody else, but that's the only one I still get. Do you think that they have a economic justification for that? I mean, I don't know Uline at all, other than I know who they are as a distributor, so I don't have any contacts there. I mean, they strike me as a very well-run distributor. I would imagine they probably have some data to support the print catalog. Or do you think they're just not sure, and so they're going to keep printing it until it's clearly not a good idea?
Well, I'll tell you something. The quality of the catalog has gone up over the last couple of years. There's more color. There's better color in it. So maybe there's some science to what they're doing. I would hope and assume that there's science to what they're doing.
I think that's fair. Yeah, right. So somebody out there is still using print books.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we mentioned this earlier, so we'll just go over it real quickly. In retail, you've got one user per account. In a B2B account, you may have one, several, dozens, hundreds, even thousands in some cases of users. And you may have to apply different types of services, capabilities, product sets, and permissions for everyone on the list. You have none of that in retail, none of that. I mean, if they had order routing for approval, then I guess I better not go there. I was thinking my orders get routed to my wife.
Don't go there. But you can have multiple people on a Prime account.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But that's not. Yeah, okay, fair enough. But they all get the same thing.
They all get the same thing, right? And there's not a workflow involved in the kid buying something and the parent approving.
It's just a shared login, really.
Shared login, right? Yeah. Right.
So let's see here. We have another question or comment from our friend Joe. Joe, it says, Uline, you would think they study that, but we used to get about 10 of them. This year seems that they've slimmed it down to about 1/3 the previous size and only 2 copies. Maybe trending away, although I have no knowledge of their plan. Okay, so this is better information than I've had. They used to get about 10 of them a year. Now he says the catalog is about 1/3 the size of the previous one. They've only gotten 2. So it seems like they're trending away from it. I don't have another data point to compare this to, but it sounds like, Joe's experience.
Joe, I'm getting them monthly.
Are you really?
I'm actually starting to feel bad about the consumption of paper and the trees that go into that. So,
so yep. You're doing, they must tailor. Has your catalog gotten smaller like Joe's has?
No, same size, about an inch thick. Yep.
All right. So they have they're versioning now. They're versioning and targeting.
Yeah.
Do you buy from them, Jonathan?
I do not. That's why I'm feeling guilty about all the paper they're sending my way.
I wonder why you keep getting them.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's what to do about this challenge, in our opinion. So you have to be a high tech and a high touch distributor. So we'll get into why you have to be high touch in a minute. But in terms of high tech, look, customers want to interact with you digitally. They just do. Everything from ordering your license plates to, buying products to configuring services. It's all electronic now. It's all digital. You have to be there. I don't know how to explain to people who push back on this, that this is where the world is going. And we used to attribute it to millennials to being generational, but now it's like, my mother-in-law is on her iPad all the time. It does all kinds of stuff electronically. And she was not at all, I don't think she ever used a computer in her life until she got this iPad. And now she uses it all the time. And so it spans generations. This is just how we interact now. And of course, COVID has made that advance much more quickly.
But again, I think this is a wrap-up slide, and it is a gigantic idea that you've landed upon here. So I think setting the table about high tech and high touch versus high tech or high touch, I think there's something profound in there that would be helpful for our listeners for you to explain a little bit more about.
All right. So traditionally, distributors would say, well, we're going to be high tech, which meant maybe not a sales force, really just an online presence and a lot of products and a good shopping experience. And the high touch distributors were out there with sales forces, and they were putting in vending machines and doing replenishment. And so you had, sort of the high tech CDW like distributors, I suppose, or Uline, right? And you had the high touch distributors, like a lot of building material distributors who really relied on big sales forces and branches. Our point of view is you really have to be both now. So I explained on the high tech side, you have to be both because the world's gone digital. But on the high touch side, the reason you have to be high touch is that you can never be as high tech as the disruptors are. So if that used to be how you compete, that's a doomed strategy now, because you're not going to out Amazon. You're not going to out Walmart. You're not going to out Google, and all those players operate marketplaces now. They're going to make simple high-tech shopping easier than you can ever make it. They're going to have more assortment. They're going to have better tools. They're going to have better technology. They're going to have voice ordering and image recognition long before you do. And even if you develop, they're going to be better at it for a while anyway. So how do you differentiate? Well, you do things that these disruptors don't want to do. If you look at Amazon, Google, Walmart.com, et cetera, they try to take all of the manual labor out of the process. They try to take the people contribution out of the process. They do not want people involved in adding value because they can't scale it like they can the technology. The technology remains a fixed cost. And so if you do things, I'll come back to you in just a second, Jonathan, but if you do things that these disruptors can't, then it means you're differentiating. You're being different. You're differentiating. And so that means high touch stuff because it involves people and they don't want to include people. Go ahead.
So I think, again, what's profound about what you've come up with, the smartest guy in the room you're in, as well as many other rooms that you're not in, is that you have to be high tech and high touch. And what that means is you need to be sufficiently high tech based on your description, right? You need to be good enough in the tech stuff. You may not be an innovator, meaning a creator of the technology, but you need to be a very swift adopter. So coming back to some of the data, the research we've done with NAW, this thing like item recognition, you need to be a swift adopter of item recognition. You need to be a swift adopter of the latest personalization things on your e-commerce site. You need to be a swift adopter of analytics that help you target customers better. You need to be these things. But I think as we look at the two, you're going to differentiate on the high touch, but you need to be good enough in the high tech. And that goes back to this idea that we've looked at in profit from the, not profit from the core, but the operational excellence versus the customer intimacy. High touch is your customer intimacy, right? The high tech is in a sense an operational excellence aspect of your business. You need to be good enough in that area.
Yeah, that's the discipline of market leaders.
Yes.
Right. A classic strategy book that distributors should read. So anyway, so you have to be both in our view. And so you can't differentiate on the high tech, but the good news about competing with these technology companies is they have a lot of rivals, and many of those rivals are suppliers of technology to distributors. And so whether it's, Oracle or SAP or Pros or Zilliant or ESTech or Miracle, there are all these different technology companies out there who are selling technology to distributors, and they're able to monetize that technology like technology companies must by developing it once and then selling it to many companies, right? Mm-hmm. So very high capital cost to develop, but then many, many customers. That's how you balance out the equation. That's why distributors aren't software companies, or because they have a customer of one, right? So you have to use these partners, but they are very sophisticated as well, and they are providing technology that distributors can use to fight back. And you can get not to parity, but to good enough with customers in much of the technology. But then you want to absolutely own the customer, and I mean that in a positive way, in terms of the ways that you are embedded into their business processes so that you are essential to them. They are dependent on you. And we're working on a whole series of research reports on this, by the way, which will probably be coming out next year, on how you build services and connections with customers so that they are dependent on you, and with real life examples, et cetera. But you have to do that if you want to differentiate in the long run, because it's unlikely the marketplaces will do that, and they're going to beat you on the other type of value add, which is high tech. So in a couple of points of advice, get the requirements right. It's really hard to get requirements right in distribution, and I would say one of the leading causes of websites that don't work is the requirements weren't defined right up front, or they made a compromise along the way because they went, this is too complicated. Let's just build a little bit first, but the little bit's not sufficient. So they never come back and build the rest. Jonathan?
Absolutely. I mean, there's this distinction between building the product right and building the right product. And so what we're talking here is about building the right product, building the right e-commerce solution for your customer base. Ian, I think as you have identified, you were back at Grainger in the early days of their e-commerce. That model is great for a large swath of distribution, but it's also not great for a large swath of distribution. Your most recent operating role with Whitecap, HD Supply Whitecap Construction, it's not a good model for that. So you have to think carefully about what is it we're trying to get done with our e-commerce site and make sure you're building the right thing.
Yeah, it's not a good model for that, but I helped build one that didn't work there. I mean,
there you go. Yeah, so you got scar tissue here.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm very candid about mistakes that I've made. And I mean, look, we were inflicted with a technology we didn't want because we were part of a multi-business unit company. So it was really hard to build, but even when we built it, it didn't work because it was the wrong thing. It's not just a buy and sell relationship. We should have been addressing more fundamental contractor needs. We should have done the requirements in a different way. And then I should have done a better job selling the need for that up in the organization. So, I take full responsibility. And by the way, since I've left, I think they've done a great job with e-commerce. I mean, we've done some good things before I left, but I just feel like, the sophistication of the requirements was not apparent to me up front. I didn't know the business well enough. So we wound up building some success there, but not anywhere near what we should have. And I think a lot of distributors can relate to that. And so what I say is get your requirements right up front, or you will build the wrong thing. You have to have the blueprints right, because you're the world's best IT company, but they're going to build whatever's on the blueprints. So if your blueprints are wrong, you're going to get the wrong thing. Second, select your technology carefully. I hear about people using, these sort of simple web systems like Shopify. And Shopify does have some business capabilities now, but it's not the kind of thing that's going to manage, bids and takeoffs and more complex needs. Probably, I don't even know if they will connect with your ERP for open account. Maybe they will.
Well, if you're building a B2C site in addition to your B2B site, like you want to have something that's credit cards, small number of SKUs, those technologies perform brilliantly, but they should often be viewed as an auxiliary thing to your core B2B website. And those technologies are typically going to fall short for the more complex B2B needs.
Yeah, right. So if you don't get the requirements right, you can't pick the right technology.
Yep.
Because you're not going to know what questions to ask. And so these things cascade. So you get the requirements wrong, you buy the wrong technology, you build the right site, it fails, and you find yourself having to re-platform entirely, which is so we're seeing a whole ton of re-platforming right now, aren't we?
Absolutely.
Next, you should manage your customer data and your product data like you manage inventory. With that kind of rigor is what I mean. Distributors are all over inventory management. They've got departments, they've got people in charge. They look at the measurements fanatically, and they should, because working capital is such an important part of a distributor's financial outcomes. Having said that, so is customer data and product data. It's just not as directly measurable. And so you have a lot of crappy customer data, a lot of crappy product data, and it becomes impossible to build the right capabilities and then leverage them because you don't have the data to make it all work.
We've got a comment here from Dean, which I think is good, maybe at odds with what I just said about the Shopify. And so what Dean's comment is, it's tough to invest in two platforms, point taken. Typically, if you can select one that handles both the B2C and the B2B functions, that's going to be a more streamlined approach.
Okay.
Absolutely true.
Thanks, Dean.
Yeah.
And then next, and this is a biggie, accept that your ROI models are wrong. And I tell you, CFOs hate hearing this, and I get it. CEOs hate hearing this, and I get it. But the reality is that almost no one that I'm seeing is building ROI models that speculate dramatic share loss over the next 5 to 10 years. All right. So first of all, you have this time horizon problem where the big tech players are looking in a 10-year cycle about getting into wholesale distribution. And these ROI models are typically, 1 to 3 years, maybe 5 years in rare cases. And so they aren't even incorporating the time horizon that the disruptors are looking at in order to take away our businesses, our customers. So the ROI model can't be right if it doesn't cover the right time period. Secondly, it's not anticipating a significant erosion in sales due to competitive entries. It's saying, for the most part, the ROI models that I've seen, there's sort of a worst case scenario, which may anticipate a slight decline or, grow at the rate of inflation. And then there's a aggressive case and a moderate case. And you make a couple of pro formas or 3 pro formas. Well, what if the worst case pro forma was in the next 10 years, you lost 20% of your revenue, or whatever your easy to buy and sell on marketplaces portion of your revenue is. Now, none of your ROI models are going to be positive for these investments, but some are going to be less negative than others. And I would say either be more broad-minded about your ROI models, or just realize this is something you have to do no matter the ROI. I mean, if you had a competitor in your town who suddenly offered all their customers 2-hour delivering and they were willing to accept structurally lower profit to achieve that, you'd have no choice but to match that capability or become a smaller company. Well, that's what's happening now. These things
or you'd have to figure out how to add more value, how to add more touch into what you're doing to justify the higher price.
Very good. And that's where we'll get to the other side of the screen. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, you're looking at the price value mix. You can change one or the other or both, right? So if you want to keep price the same, you may need to increase the value in some way.
I get it, in some way other than 2-hour delivery, because that's how your competitors decided to add value. And look, people make irrational decisions in business all the time. I mean, I bet you if the airlines could all undo frequent flyer programs, they'd do it in a heartbeat, because American Airlines introduced the first one, and it was a differentiator. The problem was it wasn't sustainable. Then all the other airlines introduced their frequent flyer programs, and now it's just a cost to the industry that they have to support. So and those are a bunch of smart competitors. So you have competitors do dumb things that are going to cost you money, and you have to respond to them despite that reality. And in this case, these are disruptors who on a 10-year basis are looking to get into wholesale distribution. And so if you respond with a strategy that looks at a 3-year ROI, or if you're looking at a discounted cash flow model that's 5 years, you're not going to pick up the dynamics of their 10-year plan. You just won't get it right. And then, so in terms of high touch, we talked about doing what disruptors won't. Have a general manager of services. I tell you, I go to a lot of distributor websites. They do not have a services tab on their homepage, even though just about all distributors have a wide list of services. But if you want to figure out what the services are, you've got to either call somebody there, or you have to wade through the website trying to find their services. Now, on this show, we've been through distributors like Radwell and Fastenal and Blackhawk that have really, really good services tabs and clear explanation of their services. But for heaven's sakes, get a GM of services, invest in your services value proposition, but at least take credit for what you do today, and let that GM put together a P&L for your services, even though it's going to be hemorrhaging red because we don't know what revenues these services generate. At least put someone in charge of improving profitability and effectiveness over time.
Yeah, actually, one of our listeners today has done just that. They've created a GM of services. It's a very innovative distributor.
Pretty rare. Okay, and then make it more than a buy-sell relationship. You want to make your customers dependent on you. You want to raise the exit costs. You want to make it painful for them to leave you, or the inverse of that, very rewarding for them to be your customer. Jonathan, you want to add to this?
I think you got the carrot stick emphasis just right there.
Yeah, look, I mean, if you're engaged in their operations where you're doing value-added services just for them, and we've documented, a couple hundred of these value-added services now, and you could do them yourself by going out to your competitors or other distributor sites. There are tons of ways, whether it's, cutting or bending or kitting or labeling or configuration or panel building or energy audits or safety audits. And there's all kinds of stuff you can do to become more important to your customer. Figure out what that stuff is and go do it. And it takes people, which means the marketplaces are probably not going to do it, at least for now. It's different, and thus it's differentiating. So you need a whole strategy around this. And if you need help, give us a call. We do this stuff all the time. Okay, we're about to wrap up. I will tell you that we are just releasing the third research report in our NAW series, How Technology Will Transform Wholesale Distribution. We already had the webcast. I'd encourage you to go to naw.org/howtechwilltransform to get access to the series. It's free. It features Jonathan as the primary research and me as the empty talking head. Now doing all the writing and leading some of the webinars. We've got 4 more in the series. The next one is, think about this, we're doing a survey right now of distributor suppliers. So manufacturers who sell through distribution, we're asking them if they're planning to sell direct and if they think distributors are an important part of their future and what they think of how distributors are implementing technology. I mean, you don't want to miss this report if you're in distribution, because these are manufacturers who are anonymously providing feedback in a way that means that they can be candid without fearing retribution from their distributors. So you really should dial into this series and sign up for the research reports, naw.org/howtechwilltransform. If we can help you at Distribution Strategy Group, know that we do consulting, analysis, and business intelligence. My contact information is on there, as is Dr. Bynes. Jonathan, anything to add before we wrap up today?
Pleasure as always, Ian. Thank you.
My pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Thanks, everyone, for attending, and we'll see you next week on Wholesale Change.